Elena, I have a question that I don't know if you'll be able to answer, but sorry. I want to ask how not to hate, because what's happening is so unfair, and I will mention this because it gets me so angry when people say that it's war between Russia and Ukraine, and I know that the person standing behind the camera feels the same. It's not a war between Russia and Ukraine, it's a Russian invasion on Ukraine. How not to hate? And is it possible not to hate?
It's a very good question.
Now that I was visiting refugees in Graz and in Vienna who are doing so well, and I'm thinking about, one of them is a professional waitress, and she loves her job as a barista and so on. And I was having lunch, and there were Russian families there, and they were upset because clearly we were talking about Ukraine, and we were in a meeting at that time, and they were from Moscow, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is a place where I potentially got this waitress a role, and I'm thinking she will need to serve these Russian people, and they will tell her things that are not nice, and it's no longer that she's no longer in the war situation. My young girls from Kharkiv were walking in Berlin in an area speaking Ukrainian, and being proud to speak Ukrainian. And a Russian family, a father turned around and said, "You're in a Russian-speaking corner of Berlin. We speak Russian here, not Ukrainian." And so it will continue on this bias. But how do you still serve Russian people being a Ukrainian person, for example?
As for me personally, looking at it from kind of different angles, I go by a very famous saying by Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, who said, "We are all condemned by choice." So those people, they made their choices. Do we hate them for them? If at some point in time, when you are dealing with all of it, and this is something that helps you to sustain yourself in your fight, go for it. But meaning being localized, again, it's not something eternal, because we are in a perpetual state of change, the world, we as human beings. And if you do experience a burning hate towards somebody now because you see the footage, the image of children being kidnapped and women raped, well, that's your meaning in time. It doesn't mean that after 10 years or 2 years, you will feel the same. You might, you may not. I mean, there's a lot of historical evidence and psychological evidence that people do find forgiveness in their place for whatever atrocities have been committed and have been done. But it's equally important to respect and acknowledge what you feel at the moment. And if somebody is telling you, you need to forgive, and you can't, respect what you feel at the moment, because this is your feeling. But obviously, hate is an incredibly, as well as shame, incredibly toxic feeling to live with throughout your whole life. You do need to find peace, ultimately. Forgiveness is a beautiful way of finding peace with yourself. But finding forgiveness, it's a process. It's not an outcome. Yes? And it takes time. It takes time to heal. It can't be forced upon. It can't be, it can be helped to achieve that with you being an active participant of this process of healing. When we are traumatized, quite often we feel very angry, or we feel very anxious, or both at the same time. So anger and anxiety are very basic, raw, primordial emotions. Well, they are emotions, which are stored in the part of our brain, which is called the reptile brain or lizard brain. This part of our brain is pre-verbal, and therefore, for example, things like positive thought reframing or any sort of verbal reinforcement either are not as efficient or they kind of have limits. So a good way to work with those emotions is to acknowledge how they affect us, to try and own them as opposed to push them away. Because, well, psychologically, as we know, the harder we try to push something away, the harder it tries to come back to us. Being a pre-verbal emotion, they talk to us via the sensations of our body. And for example, a good starting point for people who have been through all sorts of difficult experiences would be to kind of learn a little bit how this affects my body. How does my anxiety, how does my anger affect me? How does it talk to me? And quite often the symptoms, the visceral kind of sensations are quite the same. So we tend to experience churning in our stomach, or we feel like, well, there's a knot in my stomach. It's tightness in our chest. It's hyperventilation. When we get really agitated or anxious, we start, our breathing becomes shallow. Quite often we feel kind of dryness in our throat, or like we have a lump in our throat and I can't speak because we are so emotional. So when we start experiencing those, it means that our anxiety, our anger, all these pre-verbal base raw emotions are talking to us, and we need to attend to them rather than push them aside. So my advice would be, in this situation, go into deep breathing, which is an antidote to hyperventilation. Yes, because when we go into a deep breathing, we reassure our body from within, we reconnect with the language of our preverbal emotions, and we respond to that. There are a lot of various techniques helping us in this respect. So my advice would be, go for the simplest one. Because when we are really, really anxious, we can't really be counting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then stop, then start again. So something really, really baseline. And this technique that we've learned, that I taught Martina, is called 7-11, or the other name for it is samurai breathing. And apparently ancient samurai warriors were using it to calm themselves down, to bring them into their body, to ground themselves before they go into battle. The other name for it is 7-11, and it precisely describes the method. So we breathe in, counting up to 7, slowly, smoothly. That's the key, slow and smooth. We hold our breath for 1 second, and then we breathe out even slower, counting up to 11. Now, methodical counter, like a metronome in our head, helps us to get distracted from invasive thoughts of any kind, helps us to calm down, helps us to get into the rhythm. Yes, Bessel van der Kolk, the rhythm is the key. And then via the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system, we cool all our organs down, because the parasympathetic nervous system wraps around all our organs. And then the anxious brain, the emotional brain, scans the body. The body is okay, it is safe, it is breathing. Then it's okay, and then after that we can engage our rational brain and do the positive self-talk, because otherwise it won't be efficient, isn't it? Because anxiety is a preverbal emotion. And actually, if we get a little bit playful, and humor and playfulness again is the key, however dire the situation is. It's really important, and we shouldn't be guilty about being humorous or playful if it comes naturally, obviously. To do 7-11, the best position is seated position as you are now. You're not wearing heels, that's okay. So you should be wearing flats or barefoot, like in yoga. So your feet need to be firmly on the ground. That's the first grounding position. We are seated. Your back should be against the back of the chair, and your arms, as they are, either on the armrests of the chair or on your sides. And we start breathing. So we breathe in, counting up to 7, slowly and smoothly. It shouldn't be a problem to both of you because both of you practice yoga. But for those who are struggling with deep breathing or deep inhale, don't do it in a staggering way, like this is wrong. Rather do it shorter. Whatever comes naturally, even if it's 3 or 4, just stop and start exhaling. Yes, because the smoothness is the key. So we breathe, we count up to 7, we hold our breath for 1 second, we breathe out even slower, counting to 11. And again, no staggering. Smoothness is the key. If you can do it and stop at 5, 6, whatever, stop it at a shorter kind of period of time because you will build it up. Let's just have a go, and don't be too sort of preoccupied, don't be too OCD. Do I do it right? Do I do it right? There is no right or wrong way of doing that. Just go with the flow. Yes? And so we start. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Yes? And when you breathe out, try to release a sound if it comes naturally to you. Something like that. Because when we release the sound, it helps us to achieve even a deeper level of relaxation. It relaxes our facial muscles. It relaxes the muscles of our neck. It relaxes our vocal cords, and it relaxes, most importantly, the muscles of our chest. And for example, when you breathe in, I always look at how you do that. So you would feel how your chest is expanding. Yes, almost your shoulders are going slightly back. And then when you breathe out, you should feel it in your stomach as much as you can, literally squeeze out every ounce of air out of you. So in through the nose, out through the mouth, with the sound, if you can. Yes, so let's start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Good. Beautiful.
It's like that final moment, the savasana, which if it was me, I would always have it at least 30 minutes long because you get into an incredibly rejuvenating state where you actually start to relax.
Precisely.
And
you let go.
Right.
You release. And that's the key to that. You release the tension. Well, now, for this technique to work and for it to start coming to you when you feel anxious or angry or really feel on the edge, you need to incorporate it into your morning routine. Because quite a few clients are telling me, well, it's a wonderful technique. It really helps me to get off the edge, to come down. But whenever I need it, I forget to use it. Well, human beings, as well as being creatures of meaning, we are also creatures of circumstance, as opposed to creatures of we are creatures of habit as opposed to creatures of circumstance. So in circumstance, when we need this technique and it doesn't come, it means what? That it needs to become habitual, correct? And how do we make it habitual? It needs to be wired in our rational brain as a go-to strategy. Whenever we need it, it comes to us. So how do we wire it into our rational brain?
We're doing it every morning
By
when we're
practice.
brushing our teeth.
Precisely. Well done, Martina. You remember everything. Yes. So every morning after we've brushed our teeth, set up your alarm, which would ring and say, Martina, breathe. Viktoriya, breathe. So we sit down and do our breathing every morning. We need to do it 10 times. 7, 11, 1, 2, 3, blah, blah. It only takes 3 minutes of your time in the morning. And when clients are telling me, well, I'm so busy, I've got small children and meetings and no space, go to the toilet, close the door, sit down in a toilet seat and breathe. My point being, we can always find 3 minutes to do that. And if we do it every morning, then it becomes lodged in our rational brain as a go-to strategy. Yes? And whenever we feel that we are overwhelmed and it's too much, whenever we feel, I feel like strangling this person, I'm so angry with them, we breathe. It can be very discreet because, for example, when you are in a meeting with a lot of CEOs and it's heated and you do feel overwhelmed, you can do it, and 2 or 3 times is enough, really, and you will see the difference when you start practicing it. You probably wouldn't be breathing out through the mouth. If you are in a meeting, you won't be doing this, depends on the meeting. We can do it through the nose, in and out, both times. But for it to start coming to you as a go-to strategy, as a coping strategy, you need to do it every morning. Yeah? So it's all about consistency over perfection, because there is no such thing as perfection, isn't it? We are perfect as we are, and this is just something that we use to make us better.
Thank you, Elena.
My pleasure.
And Viktoriya, and thank you all for watching. We hope that some of this discussion was close to your heart and that you find peace in knowing that we are all trying to do our best to support, and that we are all struggling in ways that are hard to define with words, but that maybe together and through some of these techniques that Elena was so nice to describe, we can find ways to better cope with this extremely difficult situation.
And to persevere. We will.
Slava Ukraini!
Slava Ukraini!
Слава Україні!